In the beginning, God created the universe and a planet called Earth. Humans were formed in God's image to continue God's work. But soon, humans decided we want to live our way, not God's. Selfishness and violence filled the world, so God started over with just one family. And God made a covenant with a man named Abraham. The land around you is now yours. Your family will be my blessing to the entire world. In just a few generations, they grew into a large nation named Israel. The Egyptians became fearful and forced the Israelites to be their slaves. Through a humble leader named Moses, God led the Israelites in a great exodus back toward their promised land. Along the journey, God gave laws and commands to help the Israelites follow God's ways. Finally, after 40 years of struggle and complaining in the desert, the Israelites arrived back home in the promised land. In victory, the people worshipped God, but soon after, they turned from God and lived their own rebellious ways. This became a pattern from generation to generation. Israel's greatest judge was Samuel. He followed God's ways and spoke for God as a prophet. He told Israel that God was the only king they ever needed. But they desired to be like the corrupt nations surrounding them and insisted, "We want a human king who we can see to rule over us just like the other nations." So Samuel found a man named Saul to be Israel's first king. His reign began well, but before long, Saul stopped following God's ways and made many bad decisions. So Samuel told Saul, "Because you have turned your back on God, God has rejected you as a king." Samuel's search for the next king led to a courageous young shepherd boy named David. When David grew up to be king, God blessed him and the Israelites greatly. But David was not perfect. He had an affair with a married woman and committed a murder to cover it up. But deep inside, David always loved God and would return to living in God's ways. Known as the poet warrior, he wrote music to God called psalms, heartfelt expressions of prayer, struggle, and thankfulness. After many years as king, David gave the throne to his son Solomon. God also told David, "One day, one of your descendants will rule with a kingdom that will never end." Solomon succeeded his father David, becoming the richest king in Israel's history. Full of God's wisdom, Solomon wrote books like Proverbs and built a magnificent temple, a permanent tabernacle reminding people of God's continual presence. But Solomon strayed from God, marrying corrupt wives who led him into worshiping false gods. Civil war broke out, dividing the country into a northern kingdom called Israel and a southern kingdom called Judah. Soon, both of these kingdoms were led by corrupt kings who ignored God's ways. During this time, prophets were sent as messengers, calling the Israelites to return to God. They warned of the destructive consequences ahead. The prophet Elijah, a wild and rugged man, showed up false prophets by calling on God to give an awesome display of fire. The prophet Elisha followed him, bringing a boy back to life by causing him to sneeze. These prophets challenged the Israelites and their kings to return to God's better ways. But the Israelites would not listen. Distracted in their own rebellion, other nations swept in and conquered both of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. God's people were forced out of the promised land, and many were taken away to be slaves once again. The temple was destroyed, and the people lost everything. This was a time called the exile, where many of the Israelites, now called Jews, were scattered across different lands. One prophet named Daniel was sent to a city named Babylon. The law demanded that everyone pray only to the king of Babylon, but Daniel refused and prayed to God 3 times a day. So Daniel was thrown into a pit of hungry lions. But God closed the mouths of the lions, and Daniel emerged the next morning without a scratch. Though scattered, God was still watching over the Jewish people, and God gave them hope, speaking through the prophet Jeremiah's words. "I'll make a new covenant with the people of Israel, returning them to the promised land and filling their hearts and minds with my ways." 60 years later, this hope was realized. The Persian Empire freed the Jewish people to return to their promised land. A small number gathered back in the capital city of Jerusalem, and a new, smaller temple was built under the leadership of Ezra. Reunited, they celebrated and shouted with joy. But the elders wept in remembrance of what was lost. Prophets like Malachi and Isaiah pointed to the future and a coming king, a Messiah, one who would fully restore Israel and bring a new kingdom of peace. So the Jewish people waited and hoped, and God would not speak through the prophets again for 400 years.
Israel's history as recorded in the Bible is a continuing cycle of blessing and punishment for Israel's obedience and disobedience to God's law. Throughout times of victory and defeat, king and judges, priests and prophets, restoration and exile, the Israelites are blessed when they obey God and disciplined when they do not. As a nation, Israel was destroyed by the Romans in 70 A.D. At that time, the Jews scattered throughout the whole world, keeping the hope based on prophetic promises of an eventual regathering to the chosen land God gave to Israel. In 1948, after almost 1900 years had passed, Israel was again declared a sovereign nation and officially re-established in the Promised Land. Through a series of miraculous events, including the Jews' retaking of Jerusalem in 1967, this generation is witnessing the fulfillment of prophecy with respect to God's special nation. Now, I invite you to join us as we examine closer the amazing story of how, against all odds, the nation of Israel became the miracle it is today.
Do you believe in miracles? You will after watching this movie. Definition of a miracle: an extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs. Merriam-Webster's Dictionary. The miracle nation. The modern nation of Israel fits the definition of a miracle in every way. Furthermore, the nation of Israel is God's timepiece. God sees the beginning from the end and knows all things. God has a schedule and has appointed times for events to happen. God has lovingly given us a look at His schedule so that we won't be caught off guard when these events take place. He has appointed Israel as His prophetic timepiece. If you want to know what time it is on God's schedule, all you have to do is look at what's happening in Israel. In these videos, I'm going to show you how God uses the nation of Israel as a sign to the world that His return is near. Today there are approximately 100 million American church members who have very little to no understanding of Bible prophecy. These church members are from replacement theology churches that don't teach Bible prophecy and who look at prophetic scriptures as allegorical and not literal. Consequently, they do not understand the importance of Israel to the God of Israel or God's redemptive plan for Israel and other nations. These church members also have no understanding of the biblical significance of what is transpiring today in Israel, Russia, China, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, North Korea, and in other Middle East nations. They are also not aware of the significance of the formation of the European Union, new ID technologies, and much more. The good news is those who understand Bible prophecy are fully aware of the significance of Israel, God's time clock, and are watching the times with great interest and expectancy. An intelligence briefing from the Master. As He, Jesus, was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to Him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will all these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many. You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs." Matthew 24, 4-8. There will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth dismay among nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world, for the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud, with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Then he told them a parable. Behold the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put forth leaves, you see it, and know for yourself that summer is near. So you also, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Luke 21:25-33. As Christians, it is important for us to be able to recognize the signs of the times, Matthew 16:3, or as we like to call them, the times of the signs. We are living in a very exciting age, about which the Bible has a lot to say if you really take the time to study it diligently. God made no mistake by placing us in this time and place, and as such we are admonished to be brave and to contend for the faith. We are soldiers in a mighty spiritual army. Each has a unique mission incapable of being filled by another. It is time to pray for direction and purpose, and then boldly do what He commands us to do. If we truly believe that we are in the times of the signs, and that the coming of our Messiah is near, then we need to be about our Master's business. Our goal is to hear the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." In these last days perilous times shall come, say the Scriptures. And if ever there was perilous times, they are upon us. At no time in history were times more perilous on a global scale. There have always been wars and rumors of wars, but never has the potential for the utter destruction of the human race been more profound. We are living in the last days, according to the Bible. Bible prophecy outlines future history in stunning detail. The Bible claims that all prophecy will be fulfilled exactly as foretold, with 100% accuracy, 100% of the time. No other sacred writings of any other religious belief system, apart from biblical Christianity, make such a claim. About 1/3 of the Bible is prophetic in nature. For 20 centuries, scholars and skeptics from all walks of life, in all nations, in all generations, have debated the truth of the Bible. Yet in all those generations, among all those scholars and skeptics, given all the accumulated knowledge of medicine, history, and archaeology, science has yet to disprove a single word of the Bible's 31,102 verses. Think of it. No book in human history has endured more challenges to its accuracy across the centuries, since the Bible makes its unique claim of 100% accuracy across the board and across the centuries. The Bible contains some 790,871 words. Each has stood the test of the centuries. No prophecy of Scripture has ever failed, only those yet to be fulfilled. The Bible contains approximately 1,000 prophecies, of which nearly 2/3 have already been fulfilled. The remaining prophecies will be fulfilled during the end times. Jesus himself fulfilled hundreds of prophecies during his short time on earth through his life, death, and resurrection. The odds of any one person fulfilling just 8 of these prophecies are 1,000,000,000 to 1. Yet Jesus went beyond any conceivable odds and fulfilled over 300 specific prophecies. Only God can make the impossible possible. Some of the most amazing ancient biblical prophecies have had their fulfillment in our modern times. The most amazing of these concerns the modern nation of Israel, and God said, when you see this one happen, watch out, for his return will be soon. So we can look at Israel as a sort of prophetic timepiece to see where we are on God's timetable. And from all indications, his return has never been closer. This should either bring a great sense of joy or a great sense of dread, all depending on where you stand with God. You are either for God or against God. There's no in between. Israel, God's timepiece. And he told them a parable. Behold the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put forth leaves, you see it, and know for yourself that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that God is near. Luke 21:29-31. Everyone knows that the tiny nation of Israel, with a population of just over 8 million people, nevertheless receives enormous attention in the world's media, far beyond what its size would warrant. Have you ever wondered why the tiny nation of Israel is in the news almost every day? Have you ever wondered why, when Israel does anything, it almost certainly makes headlines? Why the entire focus of peace in the Middle East centers on Israel? Why Israel? What is it that's so significant about this tiny little country about the size of Connecticut? Some countries are renowned for their strategic location, their great size, their climate and natural resources, or their industrial and manufacturing capability and capacity. Israel is not known for any of these things, yet there is no other nation in the world that stirs men's heart like the mention of the nation of Israel. The promise. Well, it all started with a promise from God, and God wouldn't be God if he did not keep his promise. The promise from God was given about 4,000 years ago to a man named Abraham. What was this promise, and what does it have to do with us in the 21st century? Well, the promise was, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Genesis 12:1-3. In this incredible promise, God was setting the stage for a future miracle that would ultimately change the world. It was a miracle that would bring a new era upon the earth, and that would bring a Savior to fallen humanity. It would be a miracle that would change the course of history forever. The miracle would be known as the Jews, and their land would be called Israel. So Abraham packed up his bags, loaded up his camels and donkeys, and left the land where he had grown up. He left the people that he had loved all his life, and left the protection and comfort of his own father and family. This was a big step of faith, but he trusted God to keep his promise, and God did. Although Abraham did not personally get to see this land himself, God fulfilled his promise through Abraham's descendants. God led the descendants of Abraham into a land flowing with milk and honey. He blessed them. They prospered and grew into a great nation just as God had promised. The land, the promised land, is known today as Israel. Well, part of it anyway. Actually, the land that Israel occupies today is just a small part of the land that God had promised to Abraham. To keep peace in the Middle East, Israel had been pressured to give away much of its land. In the near future, they will obtain all the land that God had promised to Abraham, but that's another story that we'll get to later. The lease agreement. Now, Israel was a nation. They occupied the land. They did not own the land. God owned the land. But you might say that God leased the land to Israel. And, as with all leases, there's a lease agreement that contains a list of rules and regulations that must be followed. God gave Israel a list of rules and regulations that the people were to abide by. As long as Israel obeyed the rules, they would be allowed to live in the land. Imagine having God as your landlord. One rule in particular that God gave Israel was a rule regarding the very land itself. The rule is as follows. When you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards, and gather their crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a Sabbath of rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your manservant and maidservant, and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you. as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. Count off 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbaths of years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet through your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty through the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each one of you is to return to his family property, and each to his own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it is a jubilee, and it is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of Jubilee, everyone is to return to his own property. Leviticus 25, 2-13. This rule may have been in the fine print because Israel never once obeyed. The rule basically says that Israel could farm the land, plant and harvest their crops, and reap the bounty. They could do this for 6 years, but every 7th year they had to let the land rest. No planting, no tending of the crops, but whatever did grow they were allowed to eat and to feed their animals. They were not allowed to harvest and sell their crops. Secondly, after 7 of these 7-year periods, 7 times 7 equals 49, were completed, they were to proclaim the 50th year as a year of Jubilee. A time of celebration. The year of Jubilee was a special time. It was a year of liberty, not only for the land, but also for the people. The land again was to remain idle. No planting, no harvesting. All slaves were to be set free. Property reverted back to its original owners, and families were reunited. God set these rules so that no one would have excessive debt, and slaves would not have to be in bondage for longer than 49 years. It was a time for the people of Israel to give thanks and honor God for allowing them to live and use the land. If the people had obeyed God, everything would have been just fine. But the people of Israel became greedy and stubborn. There would be no celebration. They were about to get evicted. The beginning of woes. God, being a gracious and patient landlord, put up with Israel's disobedience and gave them chance after chance to follow the rules he had set forth. Finally, God said, "Enough is enough," and removed the blessing and protection that he provided the people of Israel. For hundreds of years they won battle after battle, conquering all their enemies and reaping great riches, possessions, and livestock. They were feared by all their enemies because even their enemies could see that the hand of God protected the Israelites. With the removal of God's protection, Israel soon lost their position as a sovereign nation. Israel was conquered and destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon for the first time in 606 BC. The cities of Israel were laid waste, and the people of Israel were taken captive, many as slaves. Never again would they be a sovereign nation. They existed in various forms of provinces in a succession of empires: Babylon, Media-Persia, Greece, and Rome. The final blow. The people of Israel tried to regain their previous status and attempted many times to regroup and form their own ruling government. But the final blow came in 70 AD. The Roman legions, under orders from Titus, were dispatched to Jerusalem to put down the latest in a series of Israeli rebellions. Their orders were to destroy Israel as a nation and a distinct people. History tells us that more than 1 million Jews were killed. The Jewish temple was completely destroyed. The survivors were scattered as slaves and were even forbidden to assemble into groups of more than 3 under penalty of death. The Jews were scattered around the Asian and European continents, humiliated and despised wherever they went. They remained homeless. Known as the Wandering Jews, they kept to themselves. Wherever they went, they faced persecution, but they never forgot the promise that God made to Abraham. They knew sometime in the future God would fulfill his promise, and they would once again overcome all the odds and become the great nation that God had intended them to be, a nation that one day would become a blessing to the whole world. Daniel's 70 weeks, the most amazing prophecy. It was a very dark period in the history of the nation of Israel. They had become a nation of people without a land of their own. God's punishment for Israel for their disobedience came in the form of a payback. Israel had to pay back God for not following the 7-year rule to let the land rest. God determined upon the people of Israel that they owed him 70 weeks of years, or 490 years. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 77s and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on a wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out upon him. Daniel 9:24-27. Out of this dark period arose a young prophet of God named Daniel. He was used by God as a beacon of light to remind the people of Israel of his promise. His light still shines today for our generation to let us know that we are approaching the end times. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, conquered Jerusalem in 606 BC and returned home with the finest young men of Israel. One of these young men was named Daniel. Daniel was given the finest education and training possible by the Babylonian kingdom. Daniel was gifted with great wisdom and prophetic abilities by God because of his great faithfulness. As a result of his great capabilities, Daniel was promoted from a Jewish slave to royal advisor and later first minister of all Babylon, the greatest of all the ancient empires. While Daniel lived in the royal palace, the remainder of the Jewish people lived under the rule of the Babylonian army in Jerusalem. There was another prophet of God named Jeremiah who spoke to these people. Jeremiah declared that this whole land shall be desolation and astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Jeremiah 25:11. Angelgram. As Daniel prayed for his people, God answered Daniel's prayer by sending his angel Gabriel to give him a message and understanding about events that would take place in the future. Daniel received one of the most amazing prophecies ever given to man, the prophecy of the 70 weeks of years. It was a vision of the future, which included the coming rejection of Jesus the Messiah, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the future empires that would rule the world. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Daniel 9:24. This one verse sums up the Jewish history from Daniel's day to the return of Jesus Christ. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city, Daniel was told. The Jews measured time in units, as did the Greeks, just like we use the word decade to denote a period of 10 years. The Jews measured by sevens rather than tens like the Greeks, so the Jewish or Hebrew equivalent to a decade of 10 years was the Hebrew Shabuah, or week, a period of 7 years. 70 of these weeks indicates a period of 490 years. So the penalty given Daniel's people, the Jews, and the holy city of Jerusalem was 70 weeks, or 490 years. The first 69 weeks. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes. There will be 7 sevens, 7s and 62. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. Daniel 9:25 and 26. Just how accurate is Daniel? In the late 19th century, Sir Robert Anderson, a retired Scotland Yard inspector, reviewed Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks of years. In his book, The Coming Prince, Anderson calculated the first 69 weeks of Daniel's prophecy. Daniel stated that there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens that comes to 483 biblical years. A biblical year equals 360 days. The clock starts ticking. History tells us that on March 4th, 445 BC, a decree was issued by the Persian king Artaxerxes Longimanus to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Exactly to the day, March 30th, 33 AD, Jesus rode into Jerusalem. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day that would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." Luke 19:41 through 44. In AD 70, less than 40 years after Christ's prophecy, the Roman army besieged Jerusalem, killing more than 1 million of her inhabitants. The Roman legion leveled the city of Jerusalem, completely fulfilling Christ's prophecy that they will not leave one stone on another, Luke 19:44. The temple was completely destroyed and taken apart stone by stone to melt down the gold that had lined the wall of the inner temple. Still confused? Get your calculator. By working backwards from our calendar dates, follow these computations. From March 14th, 445 BC, the date of the command to rebuild Jerusalem, to March 14th, AD 32, is 476 years of 365 days each, or 173,740 days. Add the 24 days from March 14th, AD 32, until April 6th, AD 32, Palm Sunday, the cutting off of Messiah, 24 days. Then add the 116 leap days that occurred during this period, calculated by the Royal Observatory, Greenwich, United Kingdom, 116 days. These numbers added together, 173,740 plus 24 plus 116 equals 173,880 total days, the exact duration of Daniel's 69 weeks of years. The clock stops ticking. But wait, I thought you said there were 70 weeks. You've only accounted for 69 weeks. That's right. God stopped his prophetic watch. The 70th and final week owed by Israel is yet to come. The 7-year tribulation period, the last 70th week of 7 critical years, remains to be fulfilled in our generation. In Daniel 9:24, we are specifically told that the 70 weeks are decreed for Daniel's people, the Jews. The first 69 weeks of years dealt with the Jewish people and God's witness to the world through his chosen people. The final 70th week of 7 years will again be focused on God's dealing with Israel and the judgment of the world through attention-getting events. 360 times 7 equals 2,520. After the destruction of Jerusalem and the rejection of Jesus the Messiah, the Jews were taken captive and dispersed throughout Europe and Asia. They left the Promised Land fearing further for their lives. It was a dark time in the history of the Jews. Yet wherever they lived, they never forgot their roots or the promise that God had made to their forefathers to make them a great nation. The land of Israel itself became a barren wasteland, not fit for humans or animals. As noted by Mark Twain, Israel became a desolate, dry, and arid place where trees were not seen for miles. The land and the people were as one. As long as they were obedient to God, they would flourish. Disobedience brought about despair and denial. How long, Lord? Israel did not repent of its sin at the end of the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. Some of the Jews did return to the Promised Land, but the majority simply settled in the Persian Empire, Iran, Iraq. So how long until God would regather the Jews and restore them back as the nation of Israel? The solution to the mystery is found in Leviticus 26. If after all this you will not listen to me, I will punish you for your sins 7 times over. Leviticus 26:18. In other words, if Israel did not repent, the punishment promised would be multiplied by 7 times. There was a prophet of God named Ezekiel. Like Daniel, he too was captured and carried off to Babylon. He was there for about 20 years, and like Daniel, he also knew the prophecies of Jeremiah that the captivity in Babylon would last 70 years. The Lord appeared to Ezekiel and gave him this vision. Then take an iron pan, place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and turn your face toward it. It will be under siege, and you shall besiege it. This will be a sign to the house of Israel. Then lie on your left side, and put the sin of the house of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I have assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days you will bear the sin of the house of Israel. After you have finished this, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the house of Judah. I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. Ezekiel 4:3-6. So that's 390 years for the house of Israel, and 40 years for the house of Judah. That's 430 years, but we have to subtract the 70 years that Israel had served during the Babylonian captivity. So now Israel owed God 360 years of punishment, multiplied 7 times. 360 years times 7 equals 2,520 biblical years of 360 days each. So when did the 2,520-year punishment begin? From the Bible and other historical sources, including Flavius Josephus, the end of the Babylonian captivity occurred in the spring of 536 BC. This date will be our starting point. 2,520 biblical years times 360 equals 907,200 days. Converting this figure into our calendar year of 365.25 days and dividing into 907,200 days, we reach a total of 2,483.8 calendar years. In these calculations, we must keep in mind that there is only 1 year between 1 BC and 1 AD. Therefore, the end of Israel's worldwide captivity would occur after a total of 2,483.8 years had elapsed from the spring of 536 BC. Them dry bones. What was once a land flowing with milk and honey was now a dry, barren, and desolate land, a graveyard of things past, a land waiting for a miracle. Ezekiel's vision. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord, and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, O sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, This is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, This is what the sovereign Lord says. O my people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. Ezekiel 37, 1-14. The Regathering, a modern-day miracle, rebirth of a nation.
May 14, 1948, 4 p.m. Tel Aviv. On a small podium stands a determined Zionist leader before a hastily convened gathering, reading out a proclamation which would change the course of history. This is how the State of Israel was born. First, a bit of background. At the end of World War I, the Allied powers gained control over the Middle East, including the land of Israel. The League of Nations recognized a historical connection of the Jewish people to their land and granted Great Britain a mandate to help them reconstitute a national home. However, Arab riots and geopolitical considerations led to a series of British restrictions on Jewish development and immigration. Even ships, including displaced children and Holocaust survivors, were sent back to Europe. Jewish resistance grew as well. By 1947, the ball was back in the United Nations Court, where a majority of the nations decided on November 29th, after a tense vote, to divide the land into a Jewish and an Arab state. The Jews rejoiced. The local Arab population, well, they launched a war throughout the country. May 15, 1948 was the date the British mandate officially ended, the date the Jewish state was to be declared, and the date 5 regular Arab armies planned a coordinated attack to annihilate the newborn state. On May 12th, David Ben-Gurion convened the People's Council. The atmosphere was grave. Moshe Sharet reported that the Americans are demanding a postponement of the declaration, or else they would not help Israel against the United Arab Invasion. Golda Meir reported that King Abdullah had retracted his original agreement and will join the attack. Military leaders expressed serious doubts about the ability of the small Jewish community to withstand 5 regular Arab armies equipped with European weaponry. But somehow, after 13 hours of deliberations, Ben-Gurion succeeds in swaying the balance against the American demand. And on Friday, May 14th, in the presence of local Jewish leaders, he declares the establishment of the State of Israel. The proclamation, which was inspired by the American Declaration of Independence, asserted the historical and moral rights of the Jewish people in its historic homeland, and defined Israel as a Jewish democratic state based on equal rights, freedom, and justice. The declaration ended with a call on Jews to return home and extended a hand for peace towards the local Arab population and neighboring Arab countries. The Arab invasion was immediate and lasted for over a year. Close to 50% of Israel's small fighting force were survivors of the Nazi death camps who vowed never again. 1 out of every 100 Jews living in Israel died in the fighting. But by the end of the war, the small Jewish state had emerged victorious as an independent nation in its homeland for the first time in 2,000 years.
God's in the miracle business. By God's grace, the outnumbered and outgunned Israelis were victorious. Humanly speaking, there's no way to explain the well-trained, heavily armed Muslim army that outnumbered them 10-1. The restoration of Israel is a modern miracle in every way. Its continuing survival is an even greater miracle. Never in history has such a thing happened. From being scattered around the world for over 2,500 years, they returned to the original piece of real estate that God had promised them. Amazingly, their culture, customs, religious, and dietary laws remained intact. And in spite of living under horrible conditions in lands that did not belong to them, a sense of nationhood survived in their hearts. A dead language revived. Fulfilling the words of the prophet Zephaniah, even the Hebrew tongue, a dead language even before the days of the Roman occupation, is the working language of Jerusalem today. Then will I purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call upon the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. Zephaniah 3:9. Tick, tick, tick. With the restoration of Israel on May 14, 1948, God started the prophetic watch again. When the six-pointed Star of David ascended for the first time over the newly established nation of Israel, the countdown to the end of the present age began. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Matthew 24:32-35. In the parable of the fig tree, we are commanded to learn about the general time right before the return of Jesus Christ. We are the generation that has seen and witnessed the rebirth of Israel. With the people of Israel back in the Promised Land, their attention turned to the land itself. It had been nearly 2,000 years since the Jews had been back in their land. The once fertile land, filled with milk and honey, was now desolate and devoid of any plant life, and pocketed with mosquito-infested swamps. For I will take you from the nations, gather you from all the lands, and bring you into your own land. Ezekiel 36:24. Thus says the Lord, I will cause the cities to be inhabited, and the waste places to be rebuilt. The desolate land will be cultivated instead of being a desolation in the sight of everyone who passes by. They will say, this desolate land has become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste, desolate and ruined cities are fortified and inhabited. Ezekiel 36:33-35. In other words, God promised that when the Jews returned to the land, it would be reclaimed from being a wasteland and would become like the Garden of Eden. Mark Twain visited the Holy Land in 1867 and wrote of his visit, "A desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We never saw a human being on the whole route. There was hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive and the cactus, those fast friends of the worthless soil, had almost deserted the country." 1867. Quoted in Mark Twain, The Innocents Abroad, London, 1881. And this is exactly what has happened. The swamps were drained, trees were planted, water was conserved and channeled carefully to the agricultural regions. The result was that by 1950, the land had been reclaimed, and by the end of the 20th century, Israel had become the breadbasket of the Middle East, growing every kind of crop imaginable. During the 20th century, the Jews planted 250 million trees, and Israel ended the century as the only nation in the world with more trees than at the beginning of the century. No mistake. There can be no mistake. The rebirth of Israel is the key sign around which all other prophetic signs began to appear. Never before has this explicitly predicted event appeared in history, and it can't be undone. Israel can't unbecome a nation. They can't stop speaking Hebrew again. In other words, once the rebirth of Israel was set into motion, all the other predicted events also fell into place, and they all lead to one final conclusion: the second coming of Jesus Christ. Israel is God's time clock. Its existence was foretold in detail from the point in Israel's history in which its revival seemed the least likely by individuals who had the least reason to expect that prophecy would ever be fulfilled. To underscore its divine importance, God has surrounded the revival of Israel with one miracle after another, so that there would be no mistake. Having made that point, He promised the generation that would witness that rebirth would not pass until all these things be fulfilled. We can't know the day or the hour, but we can know when it's soon, even at the doors. Watch Israel. For when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. Luke 21:28. An even greater miracle. Just as God knows the beginning from the end about Israel, He also knows our beginning and our end, and even everything in between. O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. Psalm 139, 1-4. God knows everything about us. He even knows us better than we know ourselves, and yet He still loves us. This is perhaps the greatest miracle of all.